Welcome to another episode of Living Justice, Living Leadership. I'm your host, Lee Fisher, Dean of Cleveland Marshall College of Law at Cleveland State University. You know, I've had the great privilege to live my life at the intersection of the public, private, nonprofit, and academic worlds. As a lawyer, CEO of 2 nonprofit organizations, and as a state legislator, attorney general, and lieutenant governor. And the lessons I've learned come down to just 2 words: justice and leadership. That's why every week we'll talk to people who are walking the walk. Some are lawyers and some are not, but all of them have something in common. They are change makers. They are guardians of justice. They are living justice, and they are living leadership. Welcome, everyone. I couldn't be more excited that my guest today is somebody I've known for a long time, Richard Cordray. And I want to tell you a little bit about him before we begin our interview. Richard and I have had, in some ways, similar careers in the sense that we both held public office in 4 different positions. We've actually worked together in one of those positions, but I will tell you in advance, his legal career is much more distinguished than mine, and I think you'll understand why when I describe it. First, let me begin to describe his public service career. He was, like I was years before, the Democratic nominee for governor of Ohio. He and I also had similar outcomes. We both lost, but we went on to do other things as a result and didn't let that defeat get us down. He also was the director, the first director, I should say, of the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And we're going to hear more about that because he also wrote a book called Watchdog: How Protecting Consumers Can Save Our Families, Our Economy, and Our Democracy. So we'll talk a lot about that today. He also served as the Ohio Attorney General. I served in that position as well. He served as the Ohio State Treasurer. He served as the Franklin County Treasurer. He served as the state representative. And I would say the highlight of his career, no question, was when he served as Solicitor General for Attorney General Lee Fisher. And it was actually a position that I created when I was Attorney General. I believe we were the first Attorney General's office in the country to do so. If not, I don't want anyone to tell me otherwise because I like to say it all the time. I can tell you he did a phenomenal job, and that position has now become so commonplace that I think every Attorney General in the country has one, but we were either the first or one of the first. He has argued 7 different cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, which, by the way, is remarkable. He served as a law clerk, not to 1 but to 2 Supreme Court justices, Justice Byron White and Anthony Kennedy. And he has served as a professor of law, not at 1, not at 2, but 3 different law schools. The Ohio State University College of Law, Boston College Law School, University of Pennsylvania Law School, as well as the Wharton School. He's got his JD from the University of Chicago Law School, where he was also the editor-in-chief. But other than Solicitor General to Attorney General Lee Fisher, there is another highlight of his career that he probably gets asked about more than anything else. Because back in the late 1980s, Rich Cordray was a undefeated 5-time champion of Jeopardy. So we'll ask him about Alex Trebek as well. So welcome, Rich Cordray.
My pleasure, Lee. Love to be here with you. And the time as Solicitor General working for you when you were Attorney General was really one of the highlights of my career. And wish we could have done it even longer.
Well, it's nice of you to say that because you've had an awful lot of highlights. And by the way, one of the highlights I didn't mention until just now is your most recent position. And that is you have joined the Biden administration in what could turn out to be one of the most significant positions in the entire administration. You are now at the U.S. Department of Education as the Chief Operating Officer of Federal Student Aid. And I can tell you that if you're a student who has financial aid, you know this is probably the most important person in the country right now for you. Or anybody who wants to get student aid in the future. Rich Cordray is the most important person in your life other than your parents and your spouse. So we'll talk about that as well. I like to begin with the personal side though, Rich. So tell us a little bit about your family, your children, and let's start with that because I think I always like to begin with the personal before we get to the professional.
Well, it's actually, Lee, ironically, a very good time for me to be starting a job involved with higher education because our twins, and this will set you back a bit because I remember when your children were small and I worked for you, Peggy and my twins are both graduated from college. Danny
oh my God.
a week ago from Duke. and I know this podcast may appear later, but my daughter, Holly, is graduating from Emory in Atlanta, and we'll be down to see her graduate as well. We're very proud of both of them, and they're an example of what it means to have higher education unlock paths to the future.
That's fantastic. And what about your wife, Peggy? We both have wives named Peggy.
Yes, we do. My wife, Peggy, is a law professor at Capital University Law School in Columbus. She loves the job, and I think her students love her from what I can tell. She teaches mostly contracts and evidence, and has been grading exams busily for a little while here as the semester ended.
When did you decide that you wanted to have a career in law and politics and government?
That's an interesting question, Lee, and all of us can reflect back and wonder at times about it. I believe it was my mom who thought that I would be somebody who would be well suited as a lawyer, and that's not to say there were no lawyers in her family, no lawyers in my father's family, but I think she thought I had proven myself at home to be a world-class arguer. And she knew that it required a fair amount of schooling, and I was good at school. And so I think she was the one who first thought that way. What did I know about lawyering? I saw Perry Mason on TV a little bit. It may not be a very realistic manifestation of what practice has become. But what I found was when I went to college and then decided to go to law school, I went to law school very deliberately thinking, I don't know to what extent I will practice law over my life, as opposed to be involved in politics and government, which was really my passion. But as it turned out, happily for me, I've been able to do both at different times. There are times when the law was my refuge, when politics wasn't working out as I would have liked. And there were times when I could take my legal skills and put them to work for the public good, like I did working with you when you were Attorney General and I was Solicitor General, and later as Attorney General myself. And so I would say I've been sort of four things actually over the course of my career. I've been a lawyer. I've been a law professor for quite a few years. I have been a political elected official, and I've been kind of a public administrator, which goes with the territory often of being an elected official, but also I've been appointed to now my second position in the federal government.
When someone comes to you and says, I'm thinking of going to law school, but I really don't know that if I ever want to practice law, is it worth my time to go to the law school? I get that question all the time as the dean of a law school. I'm curious what you say.
I think it's a decision people have to make individually, and I would say two things. Number one, you need to compare it to the potential alternatives. A business career can lead to being involved in government and other nonprofit jobs. Many of those are really satisfying and make an enormous difference and can lead naturally to a public career. But I would say that lawyer is kind of unique. In the United States of America, you can go back to the 19th century, Alexis de Tocqueville, and he talked about just what a natural affinity there was between law and politics in American government. And so many political questions really become and start out and then finish up as legal questions. And I would say that the other thing is they say that a law degree is a credential, but also learning a way of thinking that really aids you in problem solving and dealing with difficult issues, no matter what those may be. And you're going to find those in all walks of life. And I do believe that training is very valuable, whether or not you ever practice law as a formal matter or how you might do that.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the most prestigious job you can get right out of law school is clerking for a federal judge. And the most prestigious judicial clerkship you can get is clerking for a U.S. Supreme Court justice. Tell us how you got that job, and more importantly, what it's like to be in the inner sanctums of the U.S. Supreme Court as a law clerk.
So I got that job, I went to law school, worked hard in law school. Everybody does, pretty much have to. And I had opportunities. Some of my professors had clerked for different judges and encouraged me to consider that route. It wasn't something I was thinking of. I was really interested in politics and government and wanted to get on with it. Of course, being a law clerk is being part of the government in a very different way. I started to settle down and become less impatient. Maybe it was another year, maybe it was another 2 years, but it was going to be tremendous experience. I applied, and Justice White was happily gracious enough to decide to interview me and then to pick me as one of his clerks. I was actually very interested in him because he had been appointed to the court by President Kennedy and had a very interesting career himself. He had been a football star both in college and professional NFL football.
He was Wizard White, wasn't he?
He was Whizzer White. Yeah.
Whizzer White. Okay, Whizzer. Okay.
And that was his nickname. And by the way, a nickname that he hated. Anybody ever to call him that, low betide the person who actually would, take the effrontery of calling him Wizard. But he had gone back to Colorado, where he was from, and practiced law for a number of years. And then when his friend John Kennedy decided to run for president, he got involved. He had been involved in local politics, but never had an interest in running for office. I asked him about that once, and he said that he thought that he might have been able to get elected to office one time, but probably not twice. And I think by that he meant that he knew his mind. He was a very independent decision maker, and he would probably make some enemies by doing some of the hard things. You and I have been through those issues as well.
Yes.
He was very interested in helping his friend John Kennedy in Colorado, and then he headed, I think, lawyers for Kennedy nationally. And when Kennedy got elected, Justice White ended up to be the person running the Justice Department on a day-to-day basis as Deputy Attorney General for Bobby Kennedy, the president's brother, who was the Attorney General. And then less than 2 years into the administration, when a vacancy on the Supreme Court came up, Justice White was out of town as President Kennedy asked for names for the vacancy, and he got some names, and he said, "I don't think any of those feel like my people. What about Byron White?" And Byron White, to his surprise and somewhat discomfiture, was nominated to the Supreme Court, which he felt was less active than the Deputy Attorney General role when they were really working hard on civil rights and lots of other, key issues. But he ended up to serve on the Supreme Court for well over 20 years, I think almost 30 years, and had a distinguished career there.
What's a law clerk for a Supreme Court justice do?
Well, the judge's role is to, on an appellate court, and very different on a trial court, where cases are actually heard, as you know, and evidence is submitted and people testify, and there's the give and take and the thrust and parry of actual legal proceeding. The appellate court is a little more rarefied. It's more of an academic setting. The case is already, all the facts have been settled. People are now briefing arguments only, and arguing the cases to the judge. And at the Supreme Court, what the judges do is they spend a lot of time reading briefs to prepare for cases. They also read what are called petitions for certiorari, which is the way you get your case into the Supreme Court. Most of the time you have no right to be there. They have to agree that your case is important enough to be worth their while, and they have a discretion whether to grant or deny it. And the judges, they spend a lot of time reading those briefs. They will use their clerks to prepare for oral argument. All of them do it differently. They hear the arguments, and then they decide the cases in a room where they are alone. The clerks are not in that room, just the 9 of them. They'll come back and give you some cryptic guidance about what was decided, and then each justice is assigned certain opinions to write, and the law clerks also read the briefs, also prepare the cases, give the justice whatever advice they think they should give or they're willing to hear about what to do about the case. And then if an opinion is to be written, usually the law clerk has a lot to do with either drafting it or editing it, again, depending on the justice. And ultimately you get your work done for the year and you move on, and they get a new group of clerks for the next year. So the justices stay and the clerks cycle through year after year. And I think that's been an interesting way to do things. It's become very commonplace around the country, not only at the U.S. Supreme Court, but state Supreme Courts and federal courts of appeals. And I think it works pretty well. There's good experience for the young people who serve as clerks, and the justices get fresh energy to come through all the time.
Were there times when you initially disagreed with either Justice Byron White or Justice Anthony Kennedy, who you also clerked for?
That's a great question, and I will tell you a story, which is that during the year I clerked for Justice White, in the very first sitting in October, we had a very full docket at that time at the court. It's been a much reduced docket since. They're just taking fewer cases and deciding fewer cases. But at that time, there were about, I think, a full docket of 24 cases coming in each month that they were sitting. And in October, there were two different cases assigned to Justice White to write the opinion, both of them cases where I was the clerk. And in each case, in each situation, he decided to have one of the other clerks work on one of the opinions and me work on the other. That was true for October and it was true for November. And in each case, I felt that he gave the better case away to another clerk and gave me the worst case. In the first instance, there was a First Amendment case that he gave to another clerk to work on and gave me a case having to do with labor law. And in the second instance, clearly it was the better case. Another constitutional case went to another clerk, and I got to work on a case involving who had the authority in the federal government over particular reservoirs in South Dakota. And later in the year, and we had disagreed at that time when we argued over the cases and got him prepared. He and I had disagreed on a number of instances as it happened. I thought I was about as aligned with him as any member of the court, maybe more so, but we had some disagreements. Later in the year, as I was clear to me things had smoothed out and so forth, I was working on now a First Amendment case in another matter, and he said to me something like that. I said something. I just felt the need to say something that I was glad that we'd gotten through the period where we'd had a number of disagreements over the cases. And he looked at me and said, well, he says, that's because you've become more agreeable. Which I thought was quite funny.
Yes.
But he was a real mentor to me. And later when I started on a political career, he always kept close tabs on me. And although he himself had not run for office, it was clear that he had a real love for the thrust of politics. And I remember when I lost my first race for Attorney General in 1998, he wrote me a little hand note that said, keep at it. Keep at politics. So I treasure that.
I hope you framed that note. That's nice.
Yeah, it was special.
And you had another clerk at the same time who's gone on to some success as well. I think he's now the Chief of Staff to the United States, President of the United States. Am I right?
Yes, that's Ron Klain. He was a very impressive young man when I first met him. He's become a very impressive man, period. We won't say older, but he's now the Chief of Staff, and he will make things work to the extent anything could be made to work and help them plot their course. And I have a lot of confidence in the Biden administration, not only because of the president himself and his qualities, but because Ron is his right-hand person.
What was the difference between clerking for Justice White and Justice Kennedy?
Considerable difference. Another great question. Justice Kennedy, when I arrived at the court to clerk for him, was in about either his 25th or 26th year. I'd have to go back and count him up to figure out exactly which. So he was well situated. He knew the job back and forth. He knew what he wanted out of his clerks. He knew the cases. He was probably on his 50th or 60th First Amendment case and 20th or 25th labor law case. And there was he was just a very sharp man. I mean, he had been a Rhodes Scholar and was a top student at Yale Law School and just brilliantly distinguished throughout his career. So he said that he was happy to have us talk to him about cases and we could present anything we wanted, but it was clear that did he really need us? That was not so obvious. The difference was Justice Kennedy, when I clerked for him, was just on the court. He was in his second term, and he had come from the Court of Appeals, so he had had a long tenure, about a dozen years as a judge already. But the Supreme Court is an entirely different place. At the Court of Appeals, you're often deciding cases based on what the Supreme Court has said in a similar case. At the U.S. Supreme Court, many more questions are wide open, and that you have the ultimate authority to be the last word in many cases. certainly in constitutional cases, unless the people are going to amend the Constitution, which happens rarely. And even in statutory cases, Congress may disagree, but they may or may not be able to override the decision if they do. So there's a lot of responsibility there. Justice Kennedy, as I said, was brand new, even to things like he was working with us, feeling his way. Did he want memos from his clerks? We persuaded him that we should just talk to him, which is what a clerk would want to do, and not have to do a bunch of written work as well, although we worked on opinions for him. And he was very open-minded about the cases because he hadn't seen them all. And so it was just a very different experience between the two of them. And they're different personalities and they have different judicial philosophies as well.
Were you surprised when he announced he was going to retire during the time that President Trump was president?
You know, I was and I wasn't. I mean, Justice Kennedy goes back. He was a real kind of establishment Republican in California. He was actually friendly with Ronald Reagan and Ed Meese. But so he's not really a Trump Republican as I saw Donald Trump's administration unfold, but certainly a Republican, and not a partisan Republican per se, but he was going to try to retire under a Republican president rather than a Democratic president. And by the way, I think he was quite gratified, and I think they maybe had a sense of this, that it was one of his former clerks, Brett Kavanaugh, who replaced him on the court.
Right.
Was that was kind of a legacy, I think, in some ways. Maybe I haven't talked to Justice Kennedy about that, but my sense is that was part of what helped make that happen. Maybe
years later, as a lawyer, you argued a number of cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. So you've had two different views of the Supreme Court. Very few people get that. One behind the scenes as a clerk, the other in front of the justices. Can you tell us anything about any of those cases and any of those experiences that might be an interesting story?
Yeah, well, look, Lee, just to be frank, I owe you several debts of gratitude in my life. One was that you were willing to create what at the time I proposed to you was a brand new position that hadn't existed before as Solicitor General, and you did create the position and you put me in it and gave me a lot of running room, which gave me tremendous experience. Out of that, second, you made the decision that I would be the person to argue one of the cases we had in the U.S. Supreme Court during your tenure. I believe, if I'm remembering right, it was just a week before the election that year, and maybe you would have felt differently had you had more time.
I was a little busy that week, I think.
Yeah, but right. by the way, later when I was Attorney General, I did decide to argue a case, although we had several, and my Solicitor General argued at least a couple. And it just about killed me because the preparation you need to do on top of all your job during the day and the political work you do after hours, I'm not sure that was the wisest decision. But anyway, and then of course later when you were a candidate for governor, you influentially, made it clear that you supported me for Attorney General, and that gave me the chance to run for Attorney General. I didn't win, but it was valuable experience and exposure that mattered to me later on. As I say to sometimes in tongue in cheek, my 10-year project to become Ohio Attorney General.
That's good. Well, you've had a very distinguished, not just legal career, but political career. So let's move to the political side of the equation. And let's talk about your first run for public office. What was it? Was it state representative?
It was.
Okay.
As was true for you, as I recall. You were.
It was, exactly.
Term before you then went to the state Senate, if I'm remembering right.
In fact, we did it about 10 years apart. I think I ran in 1980 and you ran, I think, in 1991.
Yes, and so we had the same experience where we ran for the legislature, got elected, and then immediately were greeted with reapportionment and changing of the lines. And
yes,
how much it would have changed things in your case, but in my case, I was now the Democratic state representative from Southwest Franklin County, and the state senator who overlapped my district was Eugene Watts, who you will recall.
I do.
Influential Republican in the Ohio Senate, and he had a lot to do with how the reapportionment was shaping up. And I think saw to it that my district got cut into 4 pieces, lumped in with a fellow incumbent, Mike Stinziano, a longstanding, very well-known legislator from Columbus. And that drove me out of the legislature, more or less. And I think that was quite deliberate. But But anyway, yeah, my first position in government was that I took on an incumbent representative, a 12-year incumbent named Don Gilmore, and ran against him. And nobody gave much of a nickel for my chances, but I didn't know any better. I thought it was just a chance. I was able to run. I was able to make my case. I was able to go door to door throughout that district. And I think just our ignorant enthusiasm carried the day. And in the end, every ward of the district, we won every single ward of the district, including very Republican areas.
Wow.
Over him. And I wish I'd bottled that magic because I could have used it in some later elections.
Well, but you did use it in some elections because years later, intervening, I'm assuming you practiced law, but then years later you ran for Franklin County Treasurer and won.
That's right. In fact, that was an interesting part of my life where I had not gone on in politics for a few years. I had run for Attorney General in 1998 but did not win. And I consciously had to make a decision, which was hard for me to kind of swallow hard and step back and run for a local office. And it wasn't an office that it was obvious that I was naturally suited for, which was Franklin County Treasurer. But I decided to do that. And happily for me, I won a very close election my first time out against the incumbent, whose name was Wade Steen, and he was very much an expert in finance. He later did a lot of work with different auditors and treasurers and local and state because he was really quite good at his job. And I ended up defeating him by less than 1 percentage point. Just then I had 50.49% of the vote. He had 49.51% of the vote. So just, almost 1%. And then I got a chance to learn how to be an administrator and learn how to deal with financial matters, and was quite successful. We had a great team that did a lot of innovative work. In fact, in 2005, I was named, and when I say I, that means we, were effectively named County Treasurer of the Year for the entire country, and it talked about the innovative programs we had started, only some of which was attributable to me, but we had a great team, and one of them went on to become later the county treasurer of Franklin County, Ed Leonard, and one of them had been a county treasurer in Marion County, Michelle Pearson. So I had top people, and that from there I went on and ran for state treasurer, which now seemed like a natural fit. It wouldn't have been had I not had that experience, and I was elected to that in 2006, and then that led eventually to the attorney general position as well.
And that 2006 year was a year that was pretty exciting for Democrats in Ohio. You were elected state treasurer.
Yeah.
Ted Strickland was elected governor, and I was on that ticket as his lieutenant governor. Sherrod Brown was elected the U.S. Senate. Jennifer Brunner, Secretary of State. Mark Dan, Attorney General. Mark Dan had some problems later, and then you were appointed Attorney General. So it was a quite interesting years.
See, I was not appointed Attorney General.
Okay.
I was elected in the special election.
That's right. I forgot. That's right. Okay. Thank you for telling me that. Yeah, that's right. And then you served the remainder of that term, 2007 through 2010, I think, as the
and the reason it matters that I was elected Attorney General in 2008 is because I was on the campaign trail and got to know Barack Obama, who was running for president that year, spending a fair amount of time in Ohio, and that mattered later because he was interested in appointing me to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau job, and I don't know that he would have known to do that or thought to do that if he hadn't gotten to know me in Ohio.
I remember that. In fact, I remember that Governor Strickland and I had endorsed Hillary Clinton, and you had endorsed Barack Obama, and therefore were the top elected official in the state to support him. And I know that presidential candidates remember that because I was in that position with Bill Clinton back in the 1990s when I was his state chair. So that's very important to a presidential candidate when he doesn't think that everybody's going to be with him. And you were with Barack Obama earlier than anyone else.
I was, and we did not win Ohio, but we got some delegates out of it, and he managed to bring home the nomination. But I had a very high regard for him. He was from Chicago, of course, and had served in the state legislature in Illinois. And I had teachers of mine from Chicago Law School, where he had been a professor, who really thought well of him. And I read up on him and his career in the legislature in Illinois, and I just really thought he would be a marvelous choice for president. I just didn't know if he could get elected. You know, the first African American ever to be elected, and we didn't know what kind of prejudice might greet that choice. But he blasted through it all and was elected twice, which he was just a real special talent, and I think a special president.
You've been listening to Richard Cordray, former Attorney General of Ohio, former Solicitor General, former State Treasurer. We're going to talk in the next segment about his public career, particularly as director of the Consumer Protection Bureau under President Barack Obama, and his new position dealing with federal financial aid, the guru for federal financial aid for President Biden. So stay tuned next week.